is E.H. Taylor small batch, but if you're watching bourbon reviews on the internet, I'll bet you already knew that. So Colonel Edmund Haynes Taylor Jr. was actually a banker, not a whiskey maker, when he came to meet a lot of prominent whiskey makers during his time in the industry. Not to be outdone by these other distillers, in 1869, Colonel Taylor decided to jump into the industry with both feet, and he bought the OFC distillery in Leestown. And OFC stands for Old Fashioned Copper, because Colonel Taylor believed the best whiskey was made in copper stills. And from there, Colonel Taylor did what he did. He innovated. He revolutionized the entire industry with things like copper fermentation tanks, state-of-the-art grain equipment, column stills, modernizing buildings, more efficient sour mash techniques, and a steam heating system that's still being used by distilleries to this day. Now, as you know, old Taylor here just wasn't a distiller. From his days in banking, he was actually quite a skilled politician. And one of the biggest accomplishments was his advocating for and helping pass of the Bottle and Bond Act of 1897. And that's a big deal because in the 1800s, when you bought a bottle of whiskey, you really didn't know what the heck you were gonna get. Like, it could have been watered down, it could have been blended with tobacco juice, like they just put all sorts of swill in a bottle, and it was hard to distinguish good products from bad products when they're just sitting on a store shelf. So the Bottle and Bond Act actually got the government involved, and that ensures that what you're getting here is a high quality product made from one distiller, all the grains come from one growing season, and it's aged a minimum of 4 years, and it's gonna be released at 100 proof. Before Colonel Taylor got that bill passed in 1879, OFC was actually bought by George T. Stagg, and the rest is history. Today, the E.H. Taylor line is actually produced in his honor by Buffalo Trace, which is owned by Sazerac. This bottle actually uses the Buffalo Trace mash bill number 1, which is their lower rye mash bill that's shared by bottles like George T. Stagg, what used to be Stagg Jr., Eagle Rare, and the actual Buffalo Trace branded bourbon. And in true Bottle and Bond fashion, this is obviously going to be released at 100 proof and aged at least 4 years. Let's see what the bottle tells us. On the front, Colonel E.H. Taylor small batch, first and only. Signed by the man himself, straight Kentucky bourbon whiskey of topmost class. E.H. Taylor Jr., Old Fashioned Copper Distillery. Of course, Bottle and Bond, 100 proof. On the back, it repeats E.H. Taylor small batch, first and only. As founding father of the modern bourbon industry, Colonel Edmund Haynes Taylor Jr. left an indelible legacy. His dedication to distilling began at the close of the Civil War when he purchased OFC Distillery. There he developed innovative techniques that are still in use today. Made by hand using some of Taylor's original methods, this small batch bourbon whiskey has been aged inside warehouses constructed by him over a century ago. Barrels were routinely evaluated to identify those with the richest and most complex flavors. A small batch of these select barrels were then blended together to deliver a distinctive character that is like no other. It is a true sipping bourbon that honors the uncompromising Colonel Edmund Haynes Taylor Jr. We love to hear from our customers, and they give you some information if you want to contact them. Distilled, aged, and bottled by Old Fashioned Copper Distillery, Frankfort, Kentucky, DSPKY 113. Let's look at the distiller's tasting notes. Taste of caramel corn sweetness mingled with butterscotch and licorice. Finish. The aftertaste is a soft mouthfeel that turns into subtle spices of pepper and tobacco. As I mentioned, we're going to do a blind review, and we're going to judge this bottle on several different criteria. But first, it really helps me out if you'll hit that like button, maybe consider subscribing if you haven't done so already. Also, your support on things like Patreon and channel memberships here on YouTube really help us continue to do what we're doing here. We also have a free Discord server where we just hang out and talk about bourbon, and you can find out the latest things we're doing. We're planning a meetup maybe for later this year sometime, and also we talk about the barrel picks and stuff that we're working on over there. So as always, links to all of those things are in the description. Check out some freaking Brewzle merch at Brewzle.com. You can get our Brewzle Glencairns, or you can get my favorite, this OY shirt, amongst some others. Like, I have literally worn this OY shirt out. I wear it as an undershirt, and I've just about worn the print off. So I probably shouldn't show you that, but believe me, this thing's been washed like 100 freaking times to get it like that. I think it looks better once it gets a little old and crackly. But that's enough talking. Let's get to drinking. Here's my blind review of E.H. Taylor Small Batch. Back in the saddle doing a bourbon review. So it's been a while since we've done one. You've been seeing them come out, but we filmed all of those before I was gone for a month. So we're back in the saddle. And with this batch, we're gonna make a small adjustment to the scoring system. A lot of folks didn't like value and availability really playing into how bottles are ranked. And I agree with that, I understand that. So we're gonna do value and availability, but realistically, value is kind of the overall score contrasted against the availability. And at least the price. And availability in whiskey has a lot to do with the price. So we're gonna still score those. You'll be able to sort by those, but it's not going to impact the actual Brewzle score. So you may see the ones that we've ranked thus far change up just a little bit in how they're ranked or the scoring, because we're gonna take that 10% that goes to those items, we're just gonna put it right on aroma and flavor, because realistically, if a bottle tastes great, if it's got great flavor, but it's not complex, it's still a really good bottle of whiskey. So that's the most important. That's where we're gonna put those numbers. This one is sample number 10, even though I've about wiped it off with my hands here, manhandling it. And we are going to give this one a try. Again, y'all know what it is, I don't. Now the first criteria is aroma/flavor. That has a nice, pleasant, fruity sweetness to it. I can tell you the manufacturer of that with almost certainty. I didn't know we were doing one from this manufacturer in this batch though. It really smells like a Buffalo Trace product to me. Now, which Buffalo Trace product, I don't know. I've got a ton of bottles from them, so not sure what this is, but the nose is pleasant, like that bright fruitiness. I get almost a little cinnamon on this one, which is weird for a Buffalo Trace product, so I might be overthinking it. That makes me kind of dial back my thoughts on that a little bit. I'm getting a little bit of an odd note. So maybe my palate's a little off, maybe my nose is a little off. It came across a little flat. I don't know if this is a bottle that's been open for a while. That was a little better. Definitely kind of some bright, almost red fruit, cherry flavor. And then I do get just like a hint of a cinnamon, but it's not strong. It's really subtle. It blends in really nicely. This has a nice drinking proof on it. It's probably right in that range that I like to drink them, which narrows down what I think it could possibly be. I do think the flavors are a little muted on this, so it's probably a bottle that's just been open for a while, which again, limits the number of bottles, but maybe not. Maybe this one just has more of a muted flavor, and I'm mistaking what I think it is. Overall though, the flavor and aroma on this one are really solid. And more so than being solid, they're exactly what I'm looking for in a whiskey, which means I'm going to rank this one a little higher. I'm just one of those guys that likes that kind of fruity Buffalo Trace flavor profiles. It's gotta be like a 70-something score on flavor and aroma. We put Four Roses at 70, and I do like the Four Roses flavor profile, but I'd probably put that one just above it. I'm gonna give it a 72. And the next criteria is complexity. What we're looking for here is how does it evolve as you're drinking it? Early in the palate, mid palate, and then on the finish, does it give you something different at every stage? This one is a little light on the front of the palate. The mid palate really starts to open up, and it does some fairly interesting things on the finish, but none of it is super overwhelming or complex. Like, they're delicious all the way through, but it's not like this super evolutionary whiskey or anything. So complexity wise, I don't think it lives up to the actual flavor, and I'm going to give it 65. And the next criteria is finish, and it's gonna be 10% of the overall Brewzle score. And we may have to do complexity and mouthfeel here on one sip, so. Again, this does have some evolution to it. The more I sip it, the more I like it. You know, it really just kind of mellows out a little bit as you get into it, and you actually pick up a lot more of those fruity notes on it when you're at the bottom of the glass versus the top. Now, this was the first pour of the day. That could have something to do with it as well. The finish on this is good, but I don't think it's quite as good as the complexity, so I'm gonna give it a 62. And the next criteria is mouthfeel. Like, how viscous and thick and how well does this whiskey coat the palate. Overall, this has a decent viscosity to it. It's not super high proof, probably in that 100-ish proof range, maybe 100 to 107. Didn't feel like quite 107 on the burn. Overall, a decent mouthfeel, but not something that blew me away. I'm gonna give it a 65. Let's kick back to future me to talk about how this actually ranks, and we'll talk about value and availability. Once upon a time, these bottles could be found on shelves just about every freaking where for like 40 bucks. But those days have come and gone. So if you could find one of these just laying around at MSRP, you are one of the lucky few, one of the chosen ones, and congratulations, because I am very rarely so lucky. And that makes the availability on this one pretty poor. Like, you can get them, they're not as rare, say a Weller Full Proof. I find these a lot more often. It's still gonna put this one at maybe like a 20 on the availability scale, maybe a 25. We'll give it a 25. Value-wise, if you get it at MSRP, this is a fantastic freaking value. And I do oftentimes find these at MSRP, usually at bourbon drops and things like that. These will be left after people pick the more highly allocated or hard to find stuff. Nowadays, the secondary market, like this gets that Buffalo Trace bump. Everybody wants everything by Buffalo Trace, so it's super expensive. You might find these $90 to $100, but realistically these days, they're more like 120 to 150 bucks. I'm gonna judge this on that $50-ish MSRP you typically see these selling for these days. I'm gonna have to put this one also at a 75 on the value scale, which puts it right there with Four Roses. This one's just a little bit higher MSRP, but it also has just a slightly better score. And that gives E.H. Taylor a Brewzle score of 68.9, which puts it 9.1 points below Pappy's 15-year, but it's less than a point above Four Roses Single Barrel, which is a much more readily available bottle. So let me know your thoughts in the comments.